She smiled at Imani, the way you smile at someone you've already decided doesn't belong. Thin polished, practiced. This collection, Mallory said, her voice dropping just enough to cut, designed for a specific clientele. Her eyes moved slowly down Imani's body, all the way down. And honestly, that structured silhouette, a small, regretful tilt of her head, wouldn't be flattering. Not with your complexion, not with your figure. The boutique went quiet, not silent, quiet. The kind of quiet where everyone heard, and everyone pretended they didn't. One woman near the scarves glanced over, then away. A man in a suit studied his phone with sudden fascination. A sales associate behind the counter straightened a display that didn't need straightening. And Imani Cross stood there 7 months of savings. In her account, her mother used her in her hands, while a stranger used her skin and her body as reasons she shouldn't be allowed to want something beautiful. If that were you standing there, what would you have done? Before you answer, stay with us. Because what happened next in that boutique would change everything. For Imani, for Mallory, and for a man in a charcoal suit who had been quietly watching from across the room, holding a watch he no longer cared about, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when dignity refuses to be bought, sold, or silenced. If you're watching this for the first time, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because we tell stories here that stay with you. Drop a comment with your city or country below. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. And if something in this moves you, hit that like button. It helps more people find us. Now let's go back to that boutique, to that quiet. Back to the moment Imani Cross decided she wasn't going anywhere. Imani had rehearsed the walk 17 times in her bathroom mirror. Not the walk into the boutique she'd been walking into rooms her whole life. She'd learned early that a plus-size black woman entering a space most people considered not for her had to carry herself a certain way. Not apologetic, not aggressive, just settled. Like she had every right to the oxygen in the room. Because she did, and she knew it. Even on the days knowing it felt like hard work. No, she'd rehearsed what she would say. She'd played it out while brushing her teeth, while waiting for the crosstown bus, while eating dinner alone in her apartment, with a notebook open on the table and the TV off, because she needed quiet to think. She had planned to walk in, ask for the Emerald Clarice bag, pay for it, and leave. Simple. Clean. A transaction, not a statement. She had not planned to need to be brave. That was the thing nobody told you about discrimination. It never announced itself in advance. It didn't give you time to prepare your armor. It hit you in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, in a boutique that smelled like cedar and money, when all you wanted was to buy your mother something she'd pointed at in a magazine 3 years ago, and said, wistfully, not even to Imani really, just to the air. Wouldn't that be something? Her mother, Dolores Cross, had worked double shifts at a hotel laundry for 22 years. She had worn through 3 pairs of work shoes. She had given Imani lunch money on days she herself skipped lunch, and she had never once complained about it out loud. Only sometimes Imani would come home to find her sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, not crying, just sitting. And Imani understood even at 11 years old that this was what exhaustion looked like when it ran out of words. The Emerald Clarice bag had appeared in a fashion magazine at their dentist's office. Dolores had been flipping through it absently, waiting for her name to be called, and she'd stopped on a full page, spread a woman in a cream coat, the Manhattan skyline behind her, the emerald bag hanging from her elbow like a small jewel. Dolores had looked at it for a long time. Then she'd said the thing about how it would be something, and Imani had looked over and memorized the name printed in the corner of the page. Clarice. Oraline House, Midtown. That had been 3 years ago. Imani had been 26 then, running a styling business out of her apartment with 3 clients and a ring light she'd bought on installment. She was 29 now, with 31 clients, a studio space she split with a photographer, and a reputation that had taken 4 years of 18-hour days, and one very public falling out with a difficult client to build. She had saved for 7 months, not because the bag was financially impossible. It was expensive, but she'd done the math, and it was doable, but because she'd wanted to save for it. She'd wanted to walk in with money she'd earned specifically for this purpose. She'd wanted to hand over her card and think, I did this for her. She'd taken the train in from Brooklyn that morning. She'd worn the olive linen blazer she loved because it made her feel like herself, not like a costume version of what she thought a boutique customer should look like. She hadn't straightened her hair. She'd worn her edges laid the way she liked them, her hoops, her rings. She'd stood outside Oraline House for approximately 45 seconds before pushing the door open. The interior was beautiful in the way that expensive things often are restrained, deliberate, every surface. Saying we didn't try too hard because we didn't need to. Display cases like altarpieces. Lighting that made everything look like it was being considered rather than sold. A faint scent that was probably engineered in a lab to smell like money without smelling like money. 2 associates were visible. One near the back, helping a woman in a camel coat. One near the entrance, blonde, early 30s, a smile that appeared before she'd even fully turned around, and dropped into something else the moment she registered Amani. It happened fast. Amani had gotten good over the years at catching the moment. The eyes did it first. A flicker of assessment skin, size, clothes, bag. The bag was Coach, a good one, but not the right label for this particular room. The flicker lasted maybe half a second, but Amani had been trained by a lifetime of half-seconds to notice. The associate's name tag, said Mallory. Hi there, Mallory said. Is there something specific you're looking for today? Or just browsing? The pause before browsing was slight. Slight enough to deny. Slight enough that Amani almost let it go. She almost let it go. I'm looking for the Clarice, Amani said. The structured one. In emerald. Mallory's expression didn't change exactly. It did something more subtle. It settled. Like a decision had been made somewhere behind her eyes. The Clarice collection, Mallory said, moving not toward the display but to a position seemed, somehow, between Amani and the display. It's one of our most exclusive lines. It comes at a significant price point. I know the price, Amani said. Of course, Mallory smiled. It's just, this particular collection is designed for a specific clientele. She let the phrase sit. Then, as if she were offering something helpful, we do have some lovely pieces in the back. A bit more accessible. I think you'd find something. I'd like to see the Clarice, Amani said again. Steady. In emerald. Mallory looked at her for a moment, and then she said it. Later, when Amani tried to describe the exact words to people her best friend Rochelle, the journalist who called her 3 weeks later, the executives she would eventually face across a conference table, she would say that it wasn't even the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to her. It wasn't the worst. But there was something about the casualness of it, the way Mallory delivered it as though it were simply professional advice, as though she were doing Imani a favor by explaining the world to her. That structured silhouette, honestly, it's cut quite narrow through the body. And the color, a small, practiced look of regret. Emerald is really tricky. It needs a certain kind of skin tone to carry it. And with your complexion, your body type, I'd honestly be doing you a disservice if I let you walk out with something that just, she tilted her head, didn't work for you. Imani's smile was gone before she knew she'd lost it. The boutique had not gone entirely silent. There was still the faint sound of music from a speaker somewhere. Still the soft voice of the associate in the back working through measurements with her client. But the immediate bubble of space around Imani and Mallory had sealed over. A woman near the scarf display had stopped moving. A man in a suit was studying his phone with a focus that felt deliberate. Near the watches, a group of 3 had paused. One woman, 40s, expensive coat, the kind of face that had been carefully maintained, looked over at Imani and smiled. Not at her. It was more complicated than that. It was a smile of recognition, of satisfaction. The smile of someone who had just watched someone else be put in her place and approved. Imani noticed it. She noticed all of it. And something happened inside her chest that she would later describe as both things at once, the burn of humiliation and the ice of fury, happening simultaneously, and neither one winning because she wouldn't let them. She had been here before. Not this boutique, not this exact woman, but this moment, this particular species of condescension that used the language of helpfulness to do the work of exclusion. She had been here at 14, when a department store security guard followed her through 3 floors. She had been here at 22, at a client consultation, where the client, a wealthy woman on the Upper East Side, had spent 40 minutes explaining to Imani that she wasn't sure Imani understood her lifestyle. while looking at Imani's body the way people look at something they find slightly distressing. She had been here so many times. The thing was, she had survived all of them. Not gracefully always. Not without cost. There had been nights of crying in cars. There had been weeks of replaying conversations, of wondering if she'd misread, of doing the exhausting work, of doubting herself before she allowed herself to be certain. That was what these moments did. They made you audit your own perception before you trusted it. But she was 29 now. She'd built something. She knew what she'd heard. She opened her mouth, and then a voice came from her left. Say it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The man was Korean, probably mid-40s, in a charcoal suit that had been made for his body rather than bought for it. He was standing near the watch display. He'd been there when Imani walked in. She'd registered him in her peripheral vision. He was not large in a way that was immediately threatening, but he occupied space with the absolute stillness of someone who had long since stopped needing to perform authority. Two men stood a few feet behind him. They hadn't moved. They hadn't needed to. He had put down the watch he'd been examining. His eyes were on Mallory. The tattoos were visible now. She could see them, at his collar, at his wrists. The edges of something that climbed up from beneath his cuffs. Dark ink against pale skin. Say it again, he said. What you just told her. Mallory's color had changed. I was giving professional styling advice, she said. Her voice had lost its practiced warmth. It was thinner now, working to hold its shape. It's part of my job to then repeat it, he said, word for word. If it was professional advice, it should be easy to repeat. She couldn't, not because she didn't remember. Imani could see from her expression that she remembered every syllable, but because there is a particular kind of cruelty that depends on the plausibility of deniability. And saying it once in the register of helpful concern was one thing. Saying it again, with everyone in the boutique now very still and very listening, in front of a man who was looking at her the way he was looking at her. She couldn't do it. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Mallory said. There hasn't, he said. He turned to one of his men, a slight turn, barely perceptible, and said something in Korean, low and brief. Then he walked to the display where the emerald Clarice bag sat on its stand under glass. He looked at Imani, not the way Mallory had looked at her. Not up and down, not assessing, not calculating. Just looked at her. Direct. Which one? Imani stared at him. Excuse me? The bag. Which one did you want? That one. She said it without thinking, pointing to the structured emerald on the stand. He removed it from the display himself. The associate behind the counter made a sound that died before it became a word, and carried it to the register. He said it's on the counter. He produced a matte black card and handed it over. The associate behind the counter looked between him and the card and the bag, and then processed the transaction with the speed of someone who understood something was happening and had decided not to be in the way of it. He signed. He took the box. He walked it to Imani. Here. She looked at the box. She looked at him. Something in her jaw tightened. No, she said. He blinked. It appeared to be a genuine blink of surprise, which told her that people did not often say no to him. No, she said again, and her voice was steady, and she was proud of that, later, in the way you're proud of things that cost you. I don't want it that way. I came here to buy it myself. The woman who just... I know what she said. Imani's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I know exactly what she said. And I appreciate that you... She paused, choosing the words, that you heard it. But I didn't come here to be rescued. I came here to buy a bag for my mother. She was shaking, she realized. Not visibly. Not yet. But underneath the olive linen blazer, her hands were not steady. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face. She couldn't name it. She'd never seen it on a man who looked like him, in a suit like that, with those men behind him. It was something that looked almost like being recalculated. Like a variable he hadn't entered into his equation had just shown up and changed the result. He set the box down on the nearest display surface. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and produced a business card. Matte black. No logo, just a number. He held it out. Take, he said. Pay me back. Imani looked at it. She looked at the box. She looked at Mallory, who had not moved, was standing very still with the expression of someone hoping to become architecturally part of the room. Imani took the card. She picked up the box. She turned and walked toward the doors. She did not hurry. She did not look at the woman who had smiled at her humiliation, though she felt her watching. She pushed through the glass door and stepped out onto 57th Street, and the city hit her all at once, noise and exhaust and cold October air. And she walked half a block before she stopped in front of a watch repair shop window and stood there with the box under her arm, looking at her own reflection, breathing. Her hands were shaking now. She let them shake. Inside the boutique, Mallory was still standing in the same spot. Her manager had appeared, a thin man with a tablet, who spoke to her in a low, urgent voice. She answered him. He did not look satisfied. Behind the counter, the associate was rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. The man in the charcoal suit had not left. He stood near the window now, looking out at the street, at the spot where Amani had been. His phone was in his hand. He was not dialing. Not yet. He was thinking. Behind him, one of his men leaned slightly closer and said something quiet. He shook his head once. Whatever it was, the answer was no. His name was Jae-min Kwon, and in his 44 years of life, he had learned that most things could be handled with money, and most problems could be solved with leverage, and that the world operated on a ledger he understood very well. He had also learned a long time ago, in a different city, in a different language, that there were moments when none of that was fast enough, and you stood there and said nothing. And you carried the weight of having said nothing for the rest of your life. He wasn't doing that again. His thumb found his contacts and scrolled to a name. He pressed call. When the voice answered, he spoke 3 sentences. Calm. Specific. By the time Amani Cross had walked back to the subway, the emerald bag still boxed under her arm, and the matte black card in her blazer pocket. The first of those sentences had already set something in motion. She didn't know it yet. She was still standing at the top of the subway stairs, the wind pulling at her hair, trying to decide if she was going to cry or not, deciding, ultimately, that she wasn't, not yet, not here, when the second sentence was already being answered. She thought about her mother. She thought about the magazine in the dentist's office 3 years ago, and Dolores saying, wouldn't that be something to a photograph in a waiting room? She thought about 7 months of savings and 18-hour days, and the woman with the pleased little smile near the scarves. She thought about Mallory's voice. Your complexion, your body type. Said gently, said helpfully, said in the particular register that made cruelty sound like concern. She went down the steps. She sat on the train with the box on her lap, and her hands finally still, the card in her pocket like a small, strange weight, and she looked out the dark window at her own reflection in the glass, her face, her size, her skin, her hoops, her edges. And she thought, I am going to figure out exactly who that man is. And she thought, I am going to pay him back every cent. And she thought, quietly, in the private part of herself, where she kept the things that were most true, I am not done with Oraline House. The train moved through the dark. The emerald box sat in her lap, catching the fluorescent light of the subway car. And 2 miles away, in a boutique that would not be the same by morning, a man in a charcoal suit made one more phone call. Card sat on Amani's kitchen table like it was waiting for her to blink first. She'd set it there the moment she got home, still in her blazer, bag still on her shoulder, keys still in her hand, and then she'd stood in the middle of her kitchen and looked at it. Matte black, no name, no title, no logo, just a number in raised print so minimal it was almost arrogant. She'd put her keys down eventually, then her bag. Then she'd made herself a cup of tea she didn't drink, and she'd sat across from the card and done the math on who gives out a card that looks like that. Not a lawyer, not a banker. She pulled out her laptop. The number was clean, no search result connected to it, which was its own kind of answer. She searched Jae-min Kwon, New York, and got a wall of silence, so total it felt engineered. She searched the initials she'd caught on the bottom corner of the card JK Holdings and found a Delaware LLC, registered to a holding company, registered to another holding company. 3 layers deep and she'd hit a wall. She sat back. The tea was cold. Her phone buzzed. Rochelle. Girl, where are you? You said you'd call? Picked up instead of texting. I need you to listen to me for a second, Amani said. What happened? Not a question. Rochelle had known her since they were 14. Imani told her. All of it. The whole boutique. Mallory's voice. The exact words. The smile from the woman near the scarves. The man and his card, and the box she'd carried home, and was currently sitting on her counter still in the bag, because she hadn't been able to make herself look at it again yet. Rochelle was quiet for the length of 3 slow breaths. The bag is on your counter right now. Yes. The bag your mother wanted, that you saved for. Rochelle, I'm not saying anything. I know what you're going to say. You don't know what I'm going to say. You're going to tell me to keep the bag and let it go, and not let them take up space in my head. Silence. Then I was going to say, you should have let the scary man buy it and just taken the win. But your version of me sounds very wise, so. Amani pressed her fingers to her eyes. I couldn't do that. I know you couldn't. I know. Rochelle's voice went softer. Are you okay? She stopped. Started again. I'm not crying. Which I feel like is either really healthy or really not. It's really not, probably. Yeah. What are you going to do about the card? Amani looked at it across the table. I don't know yet. Amani, I said I don't know. The man had neck tattoos and bodyguards, and he bought a $1,000 bag in like 4 minutes to make a point. You understand what that usually means. I know what it means. So I took his card, Amani said. I didn't take his money. There's a difference. Rochelle made a sound that was somewhere between admiration and exhaustion. You are the most stubborn human being I have ever loved. Write it on my grave. I might. After she hung up, Amani sat in the quiet of her apartment for a long time. The city was loud outside her window. It was always loud. But in here it was just her, and the card, and the box on the counter, and the cold tea, and the particular feeling she'd been carrying since she stepped out of Oraline House, which was not sadness exactly, and not anger exactly, but something older than both. Something that had been building in layers her whole life, and that, this afternoon, had added another coat to. She got up. She made herself eat something: crackers, cheese, an orange, the kind of eating you do when you're feeding your body on autopilot, while your mind is elsewhere. She showered. She put on sweats. She sat on her couch with her notebook, a physical one, the kind she'd been using since college, spiral-bound, half full of client notes and ideas and sometimes just words she needed to put somewhere outside herself. She wrote Mallory Vance, Oraline House, 57th Street. She wrote the exact words, as close as she could get them. Then she wrote, "This is not the first time this happened to a woman in that store." She stared at the sentence. She didn't know that. Not yet. It was instinct, the kind of thing you know when you've spent your whole life in rooms that are designed to make you feel optional. It had been too smooth. Mallory had been too comfortable. That kind of casual cruelty, the kind that dresses itself as professional concerns, didn't come from nowhere. It got practiced somewhere. It got rewarded somewhere. She wrote. Find out. She closed the notebook. She looked at the box on the counter. She got up, walked to it, and opened it. The emerald bag sat in its tissue paper like a secret kept too long. It was more beautiful in her kitchen than it had been in the boutique. Or maybe it was just different, stripped of the context that had been meant to make her feel unworthy of it. She touched the leather. Once. Then she closed the box, put it on her highest shelf, and went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. Jamin did not go home that night. He went to a restaurant in Koreatown that wasn't listed anywhere. No sign on the door, no name on the awning, just a number above the frame that the right people knew. He sat in the back, at a table that was always his when he wanted it. His 2 men took the table by the entrance. They ate. They didn't talk much. They understood their job. He ordered jjigae and didn't finish it. His associate, a quiet man named Dae Jung, who had worked beside him for 11 years, sat across from him and waited until Jamin set down his spoon. The building, Jamin said. Already started, Dae Jung said. Property records are public. The flagship lease runs through a parent company, Belmont Retail Group. Belmont is co-owned through a joint venture with 3 silent partners. He set a folded paper on the table. One of those partners has been looking to restructure for about 18 months. Jamin opened the paper, read it, folded it back. What does restructure mean for them specifically? Means they're overextended and they'd sell the right asset to the right buyer if the offer was structured to make it look like their idea. Make it look like their idea. Yes. Jamin picked up his water glass, set it down without drinking. How long? To gain influence over the building. If we move through the silent partner too, 3 weeks. Quietly. Nothing that touches the brand directly. Do it quietly. Jae-min said. I don't want a war. I want a lever. Dae-jung nodded. This was not unfamiliar territory. Jae-min had been building levers for 20 years. He understood pressure the way engineers understood it, applied at the right point with the right force, and things that looked immovable began to move. What was different tonight, what Dae-jung noticed but said nothing about, was the expression on Jae-min's face. He'd seen his employer pursue targets out of strategy, out of self-interest, out of the cold arithmetic of business. He'd seen him do things that were, by most measures, ruthless. He had not often seen him look like this, like something personal had been disturbed. The woman Dae-jung said carefully, Do you want us to? No. The word came out before the question finished. Nothing that touches her. She doesn't follow. She doesn't get approached. She doesn't know anything we're doing. Clear? Clear. She took my card, Jae-min said, almost to himself. She'll call when she's ready, or she won't. He was quiet for a moment. She told me no, he said. Dae-jung waited, in front of everyone, right there in the middle of the store. She looked at the box and she said no. He wasn't shaking his head. He was saying it the way you say something, that you're still working out the dimensions of. She wasn't performing it. She wasn't trying to make a point. She just meant it. Most people don't say no to you, Dae-jung said. Most people don't say no to me, Jae-min agreed. He paid the check and left. In the car, on the way back to his apartment at Midtown, he looked out the window at the city moving past and let himself exude the place he rarely went. He was not sentimental. Sentimentality in his world was a liability, and he'd trained himself out of it, the way you train yourself out of flinching. But the boutique had knocked something loose, something from a very long time ago. He'd been 18. His mother had been trying on a coat in a department store in Seoul, a nice coat she'd seen in a window, and wanted to try even though they both knew she couldn't afford it. Even though she'd told him, she just wanted to see what it felt like to stand in something beautiful for a minute. The salesman had been polite in the way that is worse than rude because it carries contempt, so refined, you can almost convince yourself you imagined it. He'd watched his mother's face change as the man spoke to her, watched her shoulders come up and then down, watched her put the coat back on the hanger with careful hands and walk out of the store with her chin up and her eyes bright in a way that meant she was not going to cry until she got somewhere private. He had been 18 and poor and completely powerless, and he had said nothing. He had said nothing. He'd told himself afterward that there was nothing to say, that speaking would have made it worse, that his mother wouldn't have wanted the attention. He'd believed that for maybe a year. Then he'd stopped believing it and started living with it instead. 26 years of living with it. The car stopped at a light. The city went on being the city outside the glass. He thought about Amani Cross walking out of that boutique with the box under her arm and her back straight and her hands. He'd seen her hands briefly before she turned, not quite steady. She had carried it anyway. He pulled out his phone and sent Dae-jung a single message, move faster on the building. Orlean House's manager, whose name was Philip Garrett, did not sleep well either. He lay in his apartment in the East 60s and stared at the ceiling, and replayed the afternoon in his head, running the numbers on how bad this could get. He'd been managing Orlean's flagship for 6 years. He'd seen incidents before. They called them incidents, the word doing a lot of work, and he'd handled them the way the company handbook outlined. Discretion, documentation, quiet resolution. Complaints filed, complaints reviewed, complaints resulting in written warnings that went into personnel files that nobody above him ever read. He'd watched the whole thing from the back of the store, through the internal camera feed. He checked it compulsively, a habit he'd developed in his second year, when a theft ring had cost the store $60,000. He'd seen Mallory with the woman. He'd seen the Korean man approach. He'd seen the transaction, which his associate had processed with a speed that suggested fear, and which Philip had subsequently looked up. The bag, paid for in full by a card linked to something called KW International. He'd spent 40 minutes with his laptop trying to find out what KW International was, and he'd found enough to make his chest tight. He'd called his regional director at 9:15 p.m. She hadn't answered. He'd left a voicemail that was professionally calm and personally terrified, and then he'd called again at 9:45, and she'd picked up on the fourth ring, sounding like someone who'd been interrupted during something. Philip, Sandra, I need to talk to you about what happened this afternoon. I got your voicemail. Can it wait until Monday? No. The word came out more firmly than he'd intended. It really can't. She'd sighed, the specific sigh of a woman who has managed upward for 20 years and learned to communicate volumes through respiration. Tell me. He told her about Mallory. He told her about the customer. He told her about the Korean man and the card and what he'd found when he searched. The silence on the other end was different after that. Say the name again, Sandra said. He said it. Another silence. Philip, her voice had changed. The efficiency was still there, but something underneath it had tightened considerably. This is the first incident involving this customer? Today was the first time I observed. Is it the first complaint? He paused. There have been previous customer complaints that I've documented and addressed. About Mallory specifically. The pause this time was longer than it should have been. Philip. There have been 3 prior complaints involving Mallory in the last 2 years. 2 are resolved with written warnings. 1 was the customer declined to pursue it formally. 3 complaints. I followed protocol. I'm going to ask you one question, Sandra said, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer it. Is there any pattern in those complaints? Any commonality among the customers involved? Philip Garrett looked at his ceiling. He knew the answer. He had always known the answer. He'd filed the documentation and closed the files and told himself that each incident was isolated, was handled, was done. He'd told himself that retail environments attracted a certain volume of conflict and that not every complaint reflected systemic failure. He'd told himself a lot of things at 9 o'clock on a lot of nights. Philip, Sandra said again. Yes, he said. There is a pattern. The silence that followed was so complete he could hear her breathing. Get in early Monday, she said finally. And for the love of everything, do not let Mallory interact with customers until we've spoken. She hung up. Philip put his phone face down on his chest and lay very still in the dark. He thought about the customer, the woman with the olive blazer and the natural hair who had walked back out of the store with the box and her chin up, and he thought about her complaint that he hadn't received because she hadn't filed one, because she'd walked out instead. And he understood now with a horrible clarity why people walked out instead of filing complaints. They walked out because they already knew what happened to complaints. They got documented and addressed and resolved. They got put in a file. They got closed. Amani found the first article 4 days later. She was eating actual breakfast, eggs, which she made herself cook because she'd been skipping too many meals since Tuesday, and her body had started lodging formal objections when her phone buzzed with a Google alert she'd set for Oraline House. She'd set it on Tuesday night before she went to bed, out of habit more than expectation. She set alerts for anything that had touched her life in a way she might need to track. The alert linked to a post on a fashion industry forum. The account was anonymous, a screen name that had no history before this week. But the post was specific. The date, the store, the associate's physical description, and a verbatim account of what had been said to a customer who'd asked to see the Clarice in Emerald. Her eggs went cold. She read it 3 times. The post was careful. It didn't name Mallory. It didn't name Imani. It described the interaction with a specificity that could have come from someone who'd been there, or from someone who had spoken to someone who'd been there. At the bottom, there was a question addressed to anyone reading. Has this happened to you at Oraline House? Share your experience. By the time Amani put her phone down, there were 4 responses. By the time she'd washed her dishes, there were 11. She stood at her kitchen sink with wet hands and read each one. A woman in Chicago who'd been steered to the clearance section before she'd said a word. A woman in Miami who'd been told the boutique was by appointment, only when it very clearly was not. A woman in Los Angeles who'd been told, in language very close to what had been said to Imani, that a particular color wasn't quite right for her skin tone. They were not all black women. One was Latina. One described herself as a plus-size white woman. Pattern was the pattern. Amani dried her hands. She sat down at her table with her notebook, and she wrote for 20 minutes without stopping. Everything she remembered, everything she'd observed, the moment Mallory's eyes had done their quick inventory, the woman near the scarves, the specific phrase, specific clientele, and what it was doing in that sentence, and why. When she stopped writing, she had 3 pages. She looked at them for a long time. Then she looked at the matte black card, which was still on her table, which she had not moved since Tuesday, which she had. She could admit this to herself, if not to Rochelle looked at every morning when she sat down for coffee. She was not going to call him about the forum posts. She was not going to call him at all until she had paid him back. And she didn't have the full amount liquid right now. She had most of it. She was close, but not the full amount. And she wasn't going to call him from a position of owing him money, because that was the kind of thing that shifted the balance of a conversation before the first word was said. She put the notebook away. She went to her studio. She had 3 client appointments that week. She kept all of them. The first was a woman named Carol preparing for her daughter's wedding, who wanted to be told she looked younger than she was. Amani told her she looked exactly as good she was, which was very good, and steered her toward a silhouette that was true to her body rather than fighting it. And Carol had cried a little and said nobody had ever said it to her that way. Amani held her elbow and meant everything she said. The second's a corporate client, a woman ascending in her company who needed to understand how rooms would read her before she walked into them. This was the part of Amani's work that required the most precision, teaching someone not to shrink, not to overperform, to occupy their correct amount of space. She was good at it because she had spent years doing it for herself. The third was a new referral, a young woman, 22, first professional job, first real paycheck, wanting to buy one good thing that would last. Amani spent an extra 30 minutes with her, didn't charge for it. On Thursday evening, she got an email from a journalist named Claire Okafor, who wrote for a mid-sized fashion industry publication. The subject line was, Orlean House, reaching out. Amani sat with the email for a long time before she opened it. Miss Cross, I'm a reporter covering retail culture and luxury fashion. I've come across an account of an incident at Orlean House on Tuesday, October 8th, that I believe may involve you. I'm not going to publish anything without your participation. I'm reaching out because I want to understand what happened, not just what was reported. If you're willing to speak, even off the record, I'd appreciate the conversation. My number is below. Amani read it twice. She looked at the business card. She looked at the email. She thought about the 11 responses that were now. She checked 43 responses. She thought about the woman in Chicago, the woman in Miami. She thought about the file that Philip Garrett had somewhere on his desk, containing documented complaints about Mallory Vance, complaints that had been addressed and resolved and filed, which is to say, complaints that had been buried with paperwork. She picked up her phone. She called Claire Okafor. Miss Cross? Claire said immediately, which meant she'd been waiting. Thank you for calling. I want to understand something first, Amani said. How did you find me? A brief pause. An anonymous tip. Whoever sent it knew your name and the exact date and described the incident in detail, but asked me not to trace it back to them. Amani was very still. Did the tip come with anything else? She said. Documentation, records. Anything like that? No. Just the description and your name. Why? I'm just getting clear on what I'm walking into, Amani said. That's fair, Claire said. Can I ask, is the account accurate? The way it was described on the forum. It's accurate. Would you be willing to... I'll talk to you, Amani said. Off the record to start. And I need you to understand something before we do. I'm not interested in a story about a terrible employee. I'm interested in whether this is bigger than one employee. Whether there's a system behind what happened to me. Claire Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then, that's actually the story I want to write. Good, Amani said. Then we want the same thing. She hung up and sat in her studio in the dark for a minute, the city outside her window doing what it always did, indifferent and relentless and enormous. She thought, someone sent Claire Okafor my name. She thought, someone who knew my name and the exact date and the details. She thought about a matte black card and a man in a charcoal suit, and 3 sentences said into a phone while she was already walking down the steps of the subway. She picked up the card. She didn't call the number, but she held the card in her hand for a long time, turning it over slowly, and she thought about levers and leverage and the particular way a man moves when he is very accustomed to being the one who sets things in motion while staying invisible. She thought, he's already moving. She put the card down. She opened her laptop. She wrote an email to Claire Okafor with 3 questions she needed answered before they met. Then she pulled up a separate tab and began building a document: dates, names, descriptions, The forum posts. Pattern she could already see. Emerging from 43 accounts, written by 43 different people, who had all walked into a boutique and been told, in one way or another, where they didn't belong. She worked until 2 in the morning. When she finally stopped, her document had a title she hadn't planned, that had just come out when her fingers hit the keys. The complaint files, what Aureline knew and when they knew it. She saved it. She closed the laptop. And 3 blocks away, in a car that had been idling outside her building for approximately 40 minutes, not watching her window, not recording, just present in the way that power sometimes makes itself felt without announcing itself. Dae-jung picked up his phone and sent a 2-word message to Jae-min Kwan. She's moving. Jae-min read it in his apartment, sitting at his own desk, his own laptop open to a very different set of documents. Property records. Corporate structures. The quiet, invisible anatomy of who owned what and who owed whom and where. Exactly. To apply pressure. He typed back, good, and then he typed, keep the distance. Don't let her see. And then he set his phone face down and stared at his screen and thought about a woman in an olive linen blazer who had stood in the middle of a boutique with shaking hands and refused. The thing being offered to her, not because she didn't want it, but because she wanted it on her own terms. And how that was the kind of refusal that changed the shape of a room the moment it happened. He had met people who had more courage than sense, and people who had more sense than courage, and very rarely people who had both in roughly equal measure, calibrated in a way that made them genuinely dangerous. He was beginning to understand that Imani Cross was the third kind. His phone lit up with another message, not from Dae-jung this time, but from a corporate lawyer he used for matters of a complicated nature. Belmont Silent Partner is ready to talk. Meeting set for Monday. Jae-min looked at the message. He looked at his watch. He thought about Philip Garrett and Sandra, whatever her last name was, and the executives above them, who had built a boutique culture where Mallory Vance had filed 3 complaints against customers. No, where 3 customers had filed complaints about Mallory Vance. And nothing had changed because nothing was supposed to change, because the boutique's business model depended on the image it projected, and the image it projected depended on who it decided deserved to stand inside it. He had dealt with institutional rot before. He knew how it worked. The rot was never one person. The rot was the system that promoted the person. The rot was the incentive to look the other way. The rot was Philip Garrett's voice, saying, I followed protocol while knowing exactly what he'd followed it away from. He picked up his phone again. He called not his lawyer, but a different number. A number that, like his own card, did not appear in any public directory. When the voice answered, Jae-min said, I need everything on Aureline House. Corporate structure, personnel history, prior legal exposure, insurance claims, everything they've tried to make disappear. The voice said, timeline? End of the week, Jae-min said, and I need it to be clean. Nothing that touches me directly. This isn't about me. He paused. It was a rare thing for him to say. It's not about me, he said again, almost to himself. And in her studio in Brooklyn, Imani Cross turned off the light and picked up her keys and her bag, and she walked to the door, and she stopped with her hand on the frame because something had just occurred to her, a thought that had been building all week, assembling itself from small pieces she hadn't quite looked at directly until now. She turned back to the room. She looked at her desk, the document on her closed laptop, the notebooks beside it, the small, precise architecture of everything she'd built, not just tonight, but over 4 years, clients and referrals and reputation, and the particular kind of expertise that came from having navigated, again and again, the gap between how the world saw her body and her skin and what she actually knew. She had been gathering information. So had he. And they had not spoken since Tuesday, and she had been the one who said she would pay him back. She picked up her phone. She looked at the card. She dialed the number. It rang twice before he answered. And he said nothing, just picked up and waited, and she could hear the quiet on the other end of the line, that particular expensive quiet of a very controlled space, and she thought, of course he doesn't say hello first, and something about the sheer predictability of it almost made her laugh. You sent my name to a journalist, she said. No pause. No denial. Yes, without asking me. Yes, and you're already moving on the building. A beat. Shorter than a pause. How did you know about the building? I didn't, she said, until right now. The silence on the other end was different then. A silence that had a texture to it, the texture of a man recalibrating. And she felt something shift in the balance between them. And she understood that this was the moment, right here, where she either stepped back from what was happening or she stepped directly into it, and there was no third option. There had never been a third option, and both of them knew it. I need to meet you, she said, face to face. No bodyguards in the room. And you're going to tell me exactly what you've already done. And then I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. And then we're going to figure out whether those two things are compatible. Another beat. Tomorrow, he said, noon. I'll send you the address. Send it now, she said, so I can look it up before I decide if I'm coming. The address came through 30 seconds later. Amani looked it up. A restaurant in Midtown, a real one, listed, public, reviewable. She looked at the reviews for 30 seconds, then put her phone in her pocket. She turned off the studio light. She walked to the subway in the cold, and she didn't have the emerald bag with her, and she hadn't paid him back yet, and she was walking toward a meeting with a man whose business she couldn't fully identify, and whose reach he was only beginning to understand the edges of. And none of it was clean, none of it was simple. And the journalist was waiting for her answer, and the forum had 71 responses now. She'd checked before she left. 71 women describing 71 moments in 71 boutiques and hotel lobby department stores where someone had decided for them what they were allowed to want. The train came. She got on. She sat in her seat with her hands in her lap, and for the first time since Tuesday, she didn't feel like she was running to catch up with something that was already happening without her. She felt like she was the one deciding what happened next. That feeling, she knew, was either the beginning of something important or the beginning of something she would not be able to walk back from. She suspected it was both. The restaurant was called Sora. It was the kind of place that didn't need to try. No neon, no sidewalk board, no hostess stationed at the door with a tablet and a practiced smile. Just a narrow entrance on 48th Street, a wooden door, and inside, the specific quiet of a room where the tables were far enough apart that conversation stayed where they belonged. Amani arrived 4 minutes early. She'd done it deliberately because she wanted to be seated before him, wanted to be the one already in the room when he walked in. Small thing. Tactical. She'd learned a long time ago that the person who arrives first controls the visual. They are settled, they're centered, they're not being watched walking to the table. The hostess took her coat without asking her name, which meant Jae-min had given it already, which meant he'd known she was coming before she'd fully decided she was coming, which irritated her in a way she filed away rather than showed. She ordered water. She sat with her back to the wall, which she always did in unfamiliar rooms, and she opened her phone and looked at nothing on it until she heard the door. He came in alone. That surprised her. She'd expected the two silent men at minimum. But he was alone, in a different suit, dark navy today. Same quality, same sense of being made rather than bought. And he walked to the table the way he'd moved in the boutique, with that absolute economy of motion that was either trained or innate and was, she could admit, difficult to look away from. He sat down across from her. He looked at her directly, the way he had in the boutique, and said nothing. You sent my name to a journalist without my permission, Amani said. She hadn't planned to open with it, or maybe she's had. That's the first thing I want addressed. Yes, he said. That's not an address. That's a confirmation. I knew the story would spread faster with a name attached. An anonymous account stays a rumor. A name makes it real. It's my name, she said. Not yours. Yes, she waited. He didn't add to it. She'd noticed this about him. He didn't fill silences. Most people filled silences. She'd built half her client relationships on the skill of letting silences sit and seeing what people put in them. He was apparently running the same technique. Do you do this often? She said. Involve yourself in things that aren't your business. Something crossed his face. Quick. Gone before she could name it. No, he said. Then, why this? He picked up the water glass that had been placed for him and turned it once in his hand without drinking. She watched his hands. The tattoos were visible again, dark and precise, and she could see now that they weren't decorative in the way she'd first assumed. They were older work, some of it blurred at the edges, with time. 20 years minimum. Maybe more. There was someone, he said. A long time ago. Something similar happened to her in a store. I was with her. I said nothing. Amani was quiet. That's it, she said. That's it. You didn't say nothing on Tuesday. No, he agreed. I didn't. The server came. They ordered without looking at the menu, which told her he came here enough that choosing was automatic. She ordered the same thing he did because she was not going to spend energy on a menu right now. I need to know what you've done so far, she said when the server left. Specifically, everything, he told her. Clean and sequenced like a briefing. Property records, the holding companies, Belmont Retail Group, the silent partner meeting set for Monday. The anonymous tip to Claire Okafor her name. The date, the incident descriptions, nothing more. He told her he had requested a comprehensive records pull on Oraline House corporate history, leaks exposure, personnel files, to the extent they were obtainable. Personnel files, Amani said. How obtainable are we talking? Legally obtainable. Everything that's been through regulatory bodies, employment tribunals, insurance claims, and the rest? His expression didn't change. The rest isn't relevant yet. She held his gaze. I'm going to need you to be clearer with me about what yet means. It means I haven't used it. It means I won't use it. Unless what's available legally isn't sufficient, and you get to decide that threshold. In my part of this, yes. She leaned back in her chair. The food arrived. She barely registered it. She looked at him across the table. This man she'd known for less than a week. This man whose full name she'd found in exactly 0 public records. And she thought about what Rochelle had said, neck tattoos and bodyguards, and the implication underneath it that anyone paying attention would hear. What do you actually do? She said. I have business interests. That's a sentence and not an answer. He almost smiled. Almost. Import and export. Property. Private investment. Private investment in what? In things that need capital and discretion. And what does capital and discretion look like when it's applied to a retail boutique that humiliated a customer? Like this, he said. Like a Monday meeting with a man who wants to sell something. He doesn't want anyone to know he wants to sell. The food sat between them, mostly untouched. Amani pushed a piece of fish to the side of her plate and looked at it and thought. She was good at thinking in the middle of conversations. She'd trained herself, over years of client work, to maintain the external appearance of presence while a separate internal process ran the numbers. The numbers here were, he was effective, he was already in motion, he had resources she didn't, and he had used one of those resources her name, without asking. The counter numbers were, the forum now had 94 responses. Claire Okafor had emailed again this morning. And Amani's document, the complaint files, was 11 pages and still growing, and she had, on her own, no mechanism to make Aureline's executives read it. I want access, she said. He looked at her. When you get leverage over the building access to Coraline's executives, I want to be in the room. That changes the nature of what this is, he said. I know what it changes, she said. I know exactly what I'm asking for. They'll be more resistant with you in the room. They'll try to make it about the incident rather than the pattern. I know. She folded her hands on the table. That's why I need to be the one talking. He looked at her for a long moment. The restaurant moved quietly around them. A couple 2 tables away. A business lunch to their left. The soft, controlled sound of a kitchen functioning properly somewhere behind a wall. You're not going to take their money, he said. It wasn't a question. No, they'll offer it. Significant money. To make the document go away. To make Claire Okafor go away. To make you sign something and disappear. I know what they'll offer. And you'll refuse it. Yes. Even if refusing costs you more than accepting. She looked at him. I have 31 clients who found me because I told them the truth about something. If I take hush money from a boutique that told me my skin tone, disqualified me from owning something beautiful, I can't do that work anymore. I can't look at those women and tell them to take up their correct amount of space if I've been paid to take up less of mine. She picked up her fork. So yes, I'll refuse it. He picked up his own fork for the first time. Monday, he said. I'll get you the meeting. She had 6 days. She used all of them. Claire Okafor turned out to be 34, direct and professionally careful, in a way that Imani immediately respected. She asked hard questions and wrote down the answers and didn't tell Imani what she wanted to hear. They met twice that week, once at a coffee shop in Fort Greene and once via video call at 11 p.m. when Claire had new information and didn't want to wait. The new information was this. Oraline House had faced a formal complaint 2 years prior, filed with the New York State Division of Human Rights, by a woman named Sasha Okonkwo, who had described an experience at the Midtown flagship substantially similar to Amani's. The complaint had been administratively closed after Oraline's legal team submitted a response citing insufficient evidence. Sasha Okonkwo had not pursued it further. "I found her," Claire said. "She's willing to talk. Off record for now." Did she describe the associate? Not by name. By description, blonde, early 30s. And she described the language as, Claire looked at her notes, professionally phrased but unmistakably targeted. Imani wrote it down. Professionally phrased, unmistakably targeted, the exact species, the kind that was designed to be deniable. How did her complaint get closed? Imani said. Oraline's legal response claimed the associate's comments were standard styling protocol. They submitted an internal policy document that they said governed all customer interactions, and they argued the associate was following it. Can I see the policy document? It's part of their legal submission, which is public record. I have it. Claire pulled it up on screen. Here. Imani read it. She read it twice. It was 8 pages of retail customer service standards that said nothing specific and everything vague language about tailored recommendations and clientele cell assessment and personal styling consultation. It was, she realized, a document designed to justify exactly what Mallory had done by never saying it directly. Someone wrote this to cover for this, Imani said. That's what I think, Claire said. But I need a paper trail connecting the document to the incidents, a date of authorship relative to when the first complaint started coming in. Imani was already writing. Who authored it? Corporate policy. No individual name attached. Someone approved it. Someone signed off. There's an email chain somewhere. If there is, I can't get to it. Imani thought about the rest. Isn't relevant yet, and a man who had resources she didn't. I might be able to, she said. The Monday meeting happened in a law office in Midtown that smelled like old paper and new money. Imani arrived with Jae-min and the Belmont silent partner, a man named Gerald Fitch, 60, the kind of tired that comes from spending too many years doing things adjacent to ethical. Looked at Imani, and then at Jae-min, and then at Imani again, and she watched him make 3 calculations in rapid succession before he settled on treating them both like the problem they were. The meeting took 40 minutes. Jae-min said very little. Imani said less. What happened in those 40 minutes was primarily financial and architectural numbers and structures, and the language of acquisition that she could follow well enough to understand that Jae-min was not trying to destroy Oraline, was not trying to purchase it, was trying to do something more surgical and more effective. He was positioning himself over the building, like a hand over a valve, not turning, not yet, just resting there, so that everyone in the equation understood where the pressure could come from. Gerald Fitch understood. When they left, Imani walked beside Jae-min on 47th Street in the thin October light and said, "How long until they feel that?" "They already feel it," he said. Garrett called Sandra Chen. That's the regional director last week. She called legal. Legal called the board. The board is currently having conversations about assets exposure and brand liability. How do you know all of that? Because the board's conversations go through a law firm that has a partner who understands the value of being useful to more than one client. Imani stopped walking. He stopped 2 steps ahead and turned back. That's, she started. Legal, he said. The partner doesn't share privileged information. He confirms or denies when the question is already in the air. There's a difference. There is a very fine line between that difference, and I know where the line is. She looked at him on the street. This man whose reach kept extending further than she'd mapped it, whose resources kept turning out to be adjacent to things that made her uncomfortable in ways she couldn't quite object to legally. And she thought, this is the part where I decide how far I trust this. I need the email chain that authorized the policy document, she said. The one Oraline submitted to the Human Rights Division. I need to know when it was written, and who approved it, and whether it was written before or after the first complaint. He looked at her. If it was written after, she said, it means they created the policy to retroactively justify the behavior rather than to regulate it. That's not a policy. That's a cover-up. And that changes everything about the story Claire is writing. He was quiet for a moment. I'll see what's obtainable, he said. Legally, she said. I'll see what's obtainable, he said again. She held his gaze. She let it go. The email chain arrived in her inbox on Wednesday evening. It came from an anonymous address, forwarded twice through layers she couldn't trace, delivered clean and formatted and complete. 14 emails spanning a period of 9 weeks. The chain began 6 days after Sasha Okonkwo's complaint was filed with the Human Rights Division. It ended 2 weeks before Aureline's legal team submitted the policy document as part of their response. The first email in the chain was from Philip Garrett. It was addressed to Sandra Chen and 2 names Amani didn't recognize. She would later identify them as Aureline's VP of Retail Operations and their general counsel. It read, in its entirety, "We have a situation at the flagship that requires a policy framework. Current documentation doesn't cover the discretionary styling consultation process in enough detail to address the complaint language. I'd recommend we get something drafted before the response deadline." Imani read it 3 times. Then she called Claire Okafor. "I'm sending you something," she said. "You need to read it before I tell you what I think it means." "Okay," Claire said, and Imani could hear her pulling up her laptop. She forwarded the chain. She waited. Claire read in silence for 4 minutes. Imani counted. "This is Claire started. A policy built backward from a complaint," Imani said, "written specifically to provide legal cover for behavior that was already happening and had already been complained about. Filed as evidence of existing institutional standards, when it was written 9 weeks after the incident it was supposedly already governing. This as authenticated." "It will be authenticated," Imani said. "I'll get you what you need to authenticate it." "Where did you get this?" Imani paused. "From a source I can't name," she said, "which means you need to authenticate it independently. That could take—" "I know how long it takes," Imani said. "I know." Claire, she pressed her finger against the table in front of her. Once, twice, like she was pressing something into the wood. "This is the story. This is the actual story. Not an employee who said something cruel. An institution that found out about the cruelty and built a paper wall around it. That's what we have." Claire was quiet for a moment. "I need to go to my editor," she said. "Go," Imani said. "Call me when you've talked to them." She hung up and sat in her apartment in the particular silence of someone who has just set something large in motion and cannot now unset it. The email chain was open on her laptop. She read Philip Garrett's first email again. "We have a situation," she thought. "You have no idea what situation you have now." Then her phone rang. It wasn't Claire. It wasn't Rochelle. It wasn't a number she recognized. She answered anyway. "Miss Cross." A man's voice, smooth. The specific smoothness of someone for whom communication is a professional tool. "My name is David Haas. I'm General Counsel for Aureline Brands International. I was hoping we could speak." She was so still, she stopped breathing for a moment. "How did you get this number?" she said. "It's publicly listed on your business website." It was. She hadn't thought about that. She filed it. "What do you want to discuss?" she said. "We're aware that you've been in contact with a journalist," Haas said. "We're also aware of some activity that's been occurring around our property arrangements, which I can't speak to directly, but which we take seriously as a matter of corporate governance." A careful pause. "We'd like to invite you to a conversation with our leadership team before anything further is published or acted upon." "You want a meeting," she said. "We'd like an opportunity to address your concerns directly." "My concerns," she said. "Is that what we're calling them?" "Miss Cross, I'll consider it," she said. "Don't call this number again. Send a formal written request to my business email." She looked it up on her own website, told him the address, and hung up before he could respond. She sat with her phone in her hand. They knew about the journalist. They knew about the property activity, which meant they'd connected Jaemin's movements to her, or they'd connected her to Jaemin's movements, which was a different thing, and a worse one. It meant they'd done their own research. It meant they knew more about who she was standing next to than she'd wanted them to know this early. She called Jaemin. He answered immediately. "Aureline's general counsel just called me," she said. "A beat. How long ago? 4 minutes. What did he say?" She told him, word for word. She'd trained herself, over years of client work, to memorize conversations while they were happening. A skill that had never felt more useful than right now. When she finished, Jaemin was quiet for 3 seconds. She'd learned to measure his silences. 3 seconds meant he was recalculating. They connected us. She said yes. How? Either through Daejung Unlikely, he's careful, or through the building inquiry. If their board's law firm flagged the Belmont conversations and traced it forward, he stopped. Or they were watching you before the building move. That landed differently. Watching me before, she said. It's possible. If they identified you from the forum post and felt exposed, they may have begun assessing the situation from your side, before they understood there was another side. They were watching me, she said again. Not a question this time. Just the fact of it being understood. I don't know that for certain, he said. But you should proceed as though it's true. She stood up from the table. She walked to her window and looked out at the street below. The ordinary Tuesday of it, the people and cabs and the bodega on the corner with its fruit display and its hand-painted sign. This changes things, she said. It changes the timeline, he said, not the direction. They're going to try to get ahead of Claire's story. Yes. Which means I have less time than I thought. Yes. She pressed her hand against the window glass. Cold. The city moved below her, indifferent. If they get to the story first, she said they'll frame it as a rogue employee and a pending internal review and a company committed to inclusion. They'll fire Mallory publicly and present it as accountability. They'll use Mallory as the floor drain, Jaemin said. Let everything funnel down to her and seal over the top. And the email chain becomes a disputed internal document from an anonymous source rather than evidence of a cover-up. Because the cover-up story requires the discrimination story to be established first. And if they frame the discrimination story, they're way before Claire's piece runs. Then you're disputing their versions instead of presenting yours. Yes. She dropped her hand from the glass. Yes, exactly. She turned away from the window. She was thinking now at a speed that felt almost physical. The way she thought when a client presentation was collapsing and she had 40 minutes to rebuild it, when something she'd planned precisely was coming apart and she had to find the new shape of it in real time. I need Claire to run the story before Oraline moves, she said. How long does she need? She hasn't finished authenticating the emails. She said days, possibly a week. She doesn't have a week. I know that. I need to call her. There's something else, he said. Something in his voice changed slightly. Not much. A degree of flatness that was different from his usual flatness. She stopped moving. What? She said. The records pull I commissioned, he said. Comprehensive one. Corporate history. Legal exposure. Personnel files. Yes. One of the prior complaints, he said. Not Sasha Okonkwo's. An earlier one. From 4 years ago. It involves a name I need you to hear. She waited. The complaint was filed by a woman named Patricia Cross, he said, regarding an incident at Oraline House, October 4 years ago. The complaint was administratively declined. No action taken. The room went very quiet. Not the room was the same. The city outside was the same. It was something inside her that went quiet very suddenly, in the way that large things go quiet when they fall. Say that name again, she said. He said it again. Patricia Cross. Her mother's name was Dolores Cross. Dolores Patricia Cross. Her mother's middle name was Patricia, which was also the name she used with medical offices and government forms and any institution that made her produce identification. Because Dolores had been the name everyone called her, but Patricia had been the name on her birth certificate. Amani's hands were not shaking this time. They were completely still. She went to Oraline House, Imani said. 4 years ago. October, he said. 4 years ago. That was she stopped. That was the month of the dentist's office. That was the month of the magazine and the emerald bag, and wouldn't that be something? That was the same month. She went there, Amani said. Her voice was working. She didn't know how it was working. She went there and something happened to her, and she filed a complaint. Yes, and they declined it. Administratively declined. The response letter cited a brief pause. She could hear him reading. Insufficient specificity of claim and absence of corroborating evidence. She didn't have corroborating evidence, Amani said. She was alone in a store. Yes, she never told me. The words came out flat. Not accusatory toward her mother. Not anything toward her mother. Just the pure factual flatness of a thing that has just reoriented every surrounding piece of information. She went to the store. Something happened. She tried to do something about it. They shut the door in her face, and she never told me. She pressed her hand to the side of her face. She didn't say anything. Her voice caught, just once, just briefly. She pointed at the picture in the magazine and said, "Wouldn't that be something?" Jae-min said nothing. She appreciated that he said nothing. She would have been unable to tolerate anything in that moment that required her to manage someone else's response to what she was feeling. What she was feeling was not grief exactly, and not rage exactly. It was closer to the feeling of a floor dropping away, and finding that you were still standing, still vertical, but now looking down into a depth you hadn't known was underneath you. Her mother had been in that store. Her mother had been treated the way Imani had been treated, or some version of it, 4 years ago. The same species of diminishment, the same calibrated cruelty, and she had tried quietly, in her own way, to say that it had happened. And they had processed her complaint and declined it, and sent her a letter that said, "insufficient specificity of claim," and she had gone home and said nothing to her daughter, and the next week, or the week after, she'd been sitting in a dentist's waiting room, flipping through a magazine, and she'd turned to a full-page spread of the emerald clear bag, and she'd said, "Wouldn't that be something?" Imani understood now what her mother had been saying. She hadn't been saying, "She wanted the bag." She had been saying, "I tried, turned away." And there it still is, beautiful and impossible, on a page in a magazine, in a dentist's office. "I need to see the complaint," Imani said. Her voice was steady now. It was the steadiness of something that has passed through trembling and come out the other side as iron. The full text. Everything they sent her. "I'll send it tonight." And the response letter. Yes, Jae-min. She said his name for the first time. She hadn't called him by name before. She'd realized this as she said it, that she'd been referring to him without naming him, the way you refer to something you haven't fully admitted exists. "This is not the same situation it was this morning." "No," he said, "it isn't. This is not a woman who was humiliated in a store and wanted accountability. No. This is a woman whose mother was humiliated in the same store, filed a complaint, was told it didn't matter, and then saved for 7 months to buy thing, they told her. Mother wasn't for people like her." She stopped. That's the story. That's the real story. And Claire needs to have it before Oraline gets in front of it. "Agreed. Call me when the documents are sent," she said, and hung up. She stood in her apartment in the silence. Her mother had stood in that store. Dolores Patricia Cross, who wore through work shoes in 3 years and ate lunch, standing over a sink and sat in dark kitchens at the end of shifts that should have broken anyone. Who had seen a bag in a magazine and pointed at it, not with longing but with something she never let become longing, because longing required believing the thing was possible. They had told her it wasn't possible. They had put it in writing. Imani walked to the shelf above her desk. She took down the emerald box. She opened it and looked at the bag inside, green and structured and perfectly indifferent to everything it had come to mean. And she held it for a long time, standing in her apartment in the October dark, and she let herself feel the full weight of what her mother had carried in silence for 4 years. Then she put the bag back in the box. She closed the lid. She picked up her phone and called Claire Okafor and said, before Claire could say anything, "I need you to publish within 48 hours. I have something that changes everything, and I'll get you the documents tonight. But Oraline is moving, and if we don't move first, everything we've built gets buried. And this time there will be a letter sent to my mother's daughter that says insufficient specificity of claim, and I am not going to let that happen." Claire was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Tell me what you have," she said. Imani told her, and the silence on Claire's end this time was the silence of a journalist who has just understood that the story she was writing was not the story she thought she was writing, and that the real story was considerably larger and considerably older, and had been waiting 4 years in a filing cabinet somewhere in Oraline's legal department, climbed and closed and forgotten by everyone, except the woman who had filed it, and then gone home and said nothing at all to her daughter about any of it ever, not once. In 4 years, Claire's piece went live at 6:47 in the morning. Imani was already awake. She'd been awake since 4, sitting at her kitchen table with her 3rd cup of coffee gone cold, watching the minutes move on her phone screen. She'd sent Claire everything the night before: the email chain, Sasha Okonkwo's account, and the complaint filed by Dolores Patricia Cross 4 years ago, with Oraline's response letter attached. She'd also sent 3 additional accounts from forum respondents, who had agreed to be named, women who had spent 3 days deciding whether the exposure was worth it and had decided yes, because the alternative was the same silence they'd been living in. Claire had worked through the night. When the notification came through, Amani clicked the link and read the piece in full, even though she'd seen the draft, because reading a draft and reading the published version were different experiences. The draft was a document. The published version was a fact in the world, permanent and irrevocable, with Claire's name on it and the publication's masthead above it, and a headline that was direct enough to make Imani's chest tight. Inside Oraline House, how a luxury boutique built a culture of exclusion and buried the complaints. Piece ran 4,000 words. It named Mallory Vance by first name only. Claire had made that editorial decision, and Imani had agreed, because the point was not to destroy one woman's life, but to expose the system that had protected and rewarded her. It named Philip Garrett by full name as the manager who had documented and press complaints. It named Sandra Chen as the regional director who had been informed. It reproduced portions of the email chain, authenticated by 2 independent sources Claire had located overnight. One of them, a former Oraline employee who had been trying to find a reason to talk for 2 years. And in the 4th section, under the subheading, A Pattern Longer Than One Incident, it described the complaint filed by Dolores Patricia Cross. It did not name Dolores by full name. It described her as a black woman, then 53, who had visited Oraline House's Midtown flagship after seeing a particular handbag in a magazine, and who had been told by an associate that the item was not suited to her profile. It described how she had filed a formal complaint and received a response citing insufficient specificity of claim. And it noted, at the end of that paragraph, that 4 years later her daughter had visited the same store, experienced a substantially similar interaction with a similarly described associate, and that a man who witnessed the second incident had intervened, and that the intervention had led, through a series of events, to the discovery of the earlier complaint. Peace did not name Jae-min. It described him only as a witness who chose to act. Amani had negotiated that language directly with Claire. By 7:15, the piece had been shared 400 times. By 8, it was the top story on 3 fashion industry sites. By 8:45, Amani's phone was ringing with a number she recognized as David Haas, General Counsel, and she sent it to voicemail and then sat and watched the voicemail indicator appear and disappear, and then appear again as he called back. She didn't listen to the voicemails. She texted Jae-min, "It's live." He responded in under a minute, "I know. Board meeting called for 10 a.m. She stared at the message. "How do you know about a board meeting called for 10 a.m.? I know a great many things at 10 a.m. She almost laughed. She put her phone down and went to shower, and she stood under the water for longer than she needed to, letting the hot run over her shoulders and the back of her neck, because she understood that what was coming today would require everything she had, and she needed to be inside her body for it, not running 3 feet ahead of it the way she'd been running for 6 days. She thought about her mother. She hadn't called Dolores yet. She'd made that decision deliberately, 2 nights ago, when Jae-min had first told her about the complaint. She needed to face what was coming without that conversation having happened first needed to walk into whatever room she was walking into today without the weight of her mother's reaction living inside her. She would call afterward. She would tell her everything afterward. After. She got out of the shower. She dried her hair the way she liked it. She put on the earrings she saved for days that required her to be the most completely herself, gold, wide, the kind that caught light from across a room. She put on a blazer, not the olive one, a deep burgundy that she'd bought herself on the day she signed her first corporate client that she'd been saving, unconsciously, for a day that matched it. She looked at herself in the mirror. She picked up her bag, her notebook, and her phone, and she walked out the door. David Haas's office was on the 34th floor of a building on 6th Avenue that had the specific arrogance of structures built to make everyone approaching them feel slightly diminished. Amani walked in through the main entrance with her chin level and her pace unhurried, and she gave her name to the security desk and waited while the call was made upstairs. And she felt the security guard look at her once, and then again in the way people looked at her when they were recalibrating their initial read, and she let it happen and said nothing about it. The elevator was mirrored. She looked at herself in it going up. She had not told Jaemin she was doing this. She had called David Haas's office at 9 a.m. and requested a meeting today. And when his assistant had said, Mr. Haas wasn't available, Amani had said, I understand there's a board meeting this morning. Tell him I'll be in the lobby at 11 and that he should decide in the next 10 minutes whether he wants this conversation to happen here or in front of a journalist. She'd been put on hold. She'd been on hold for 4 minutes. Then the assistant had come back and said, 11 o'clock, 34th floor. The elevator opened. Haas was not in the lobby to meet her, which told her something. His assistant, a young man who looked like he was already having the worst day of his career, led her through a corridor, with Aureline's brand imagery on the walls, the signature photographs of beautiful objects in beautiful light, and into a conference room that had been, she assessed immediately, set up to make her feel outnumbered. There were 4 of them. Hashi recognized him from a LinkedIn search she'd done that morning. 50s, silver at his temples, the practiced neutrality of a man who had managed difficult situations professionally for decades. Beside him, a woman who introduced herself as Constance Jarvis, EVP of Brand Operations, with the brisk efficiency of someone who had spent her morning deciding how much she disliked being here. Across from Constance, a younger man, General PR Counsel, who had a laptop open and was already typing. And at the end of the table, a man who did not introduce himself, who sat with his hands folded and said nothing when the others said their names, and who Imani clocked immediately as the person in the room with actual authority. She sat down. She set her notebook on the table. She put her phone face up beside it. She did not say anything. Haas, said Miss Cross. Thank you for coming in. We recognize that the last week has been... I'm going to stop you, Imani said, before you complete that sentence. I know what the end of that sentence is. Difficult. Upsetting. An experience we take seriously. And I need you to understand that I've heard those words used to begin a great many conversations that ended with the words off the record and non-disclosure agreement. So I'm telling you up front, I'm not signing anything. I'm not agreeing to anything that restricts my ability to speak about what happened to me or to my mother, and I'm not here to accept an apology. She looked at each of them in turn. I'm here to tell you what I want, and then you're going to tell me what you're willing to do. The room was very quiet. Constance Jarvis's expression had not changed, but something around her eyes had tightened. The man at the end of the table, the one who hadn't introduced himself, looked at Amani with the focused attention of someone who had just upgraded their assessment of the situation. Haas said, "We're prepared to discuss compensations." "No," Amani said, "and remediation steps that would." "No," she said again. "I said I'm not here for that. Let me be clearer." She opened her notebook. She looked at the page, not because she needed it, but because she wanted them to see that she'd written it down, that she'd planned this, that she was not here on emotion. "I want transparent anti-discrimination policies published publicly, with specific language, with measurable standards. Not the 8-page document your legal team wrote 9 weeks after Sasha Okonkwo filed her complaint. Actual standards, auditable." She paused to let that land. She watched Haas's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I want an independent customer complaint mechanism, not internal, not routed through store management. An independent body that receives logs and responds to complaints without those complaints being filtered through the people they implicate." Constance opened her mouth. "I'm not finished," Imani said, and something in her voice made Constance close it again. "I want consequences with teeth, not written warnings in files that nobody reads. If an associate accumulates a pattern of complaints not one incident, not 2, there is a process, and that process has an outcome. Documented, transparent, non-negotiable." She looked down at the notebook again. "I want pathways. Actual, funded, intentional pathways for Black professionals, plus-size women, and professionals from communities that luxury retail has historically treated as consumers it tolerates rather than contributors it values. Not internships for press. Real positions. Real pipelines." She closed the notebook. "And I want a public acknowledgement of what happened. Not a statement about commitment to inclusion. A specific, factual acknowledgement that a customer named Imani Cross was treated in a discriminatory manner by an associate at this boutique, and that 4 years prior, a complaint by a woman named..." She stopped. She breathed once. "By a customer experiencing substantially similar triumph, was declined by the company on procedural grounds. She looked at the man at the end of the table because she'd understood by now that he was the one who could say yes. That is what I want. The rooms held the silence. Then the man at the end of the table spoke for the first time. His voice was measured, unhurried, the voice of someone accustomed to the weight of rooms. Miss Cross, I'm Richard Voss. I'm chairman of Orleans board. He paused. We're not prepared to issue a public acknowledgement of that specificity. What you're describing constitutes an admission of liability that, I know what it constitutes, Amani said, that our legal team cannot advise. I know what your legal team can advise. She leaned forward, not aggressively, just enough. Mr. Voss, in the last 18 hours, your brand has been covered by 11 publications. Your flagship location's lease arrangement has become the subject of what I understand to be significant structural concern, and you have a journalist who is currently drafting a follow-up piece that, she paused, goes considerably further into your board's awareness of prior complaints than the piece published this morning. She had made up the follow-up piece. She had made up the board awareness detail. She watched Richard Voss's face for the tell. There wasn't one, exactly. He was too controlled for that. Constance Jarvis looked, very briefly, at the PR counsel beside her, and the PR counsel's fingers stopped moving on his keyboard, and that was enough. They knew more about what Claire had than she'd told them, which meant someone was talking to them from inside Claire's process. Not Claire, she was certain of Claire, but someone adjacent to it, a source. Someone who had been contacted for authentication and had told Orleans' legal team what Claire was building. She kept her face exactly where it was. She stood up. I'll give you 48 hours, she said. After that, whatever decision you've made is the decision you've made, and I'll continue doing what I've been doing. She picked up her notebook and her phone. I do want to say one more thing. She looked at Voss. Mallory Vance. I know you're going to fire her. I know that's the plan. You fire her publicly. You issue a statement about standards and accountability. You make her the drain that everything funnels into. She held his gaze. If you do that without addressing what this room created and protected, I will spend every platform I have making sure everyone who reads the statement understands what it doesn't say. She left. She walked the length of the corridor with their brand photographs on the walls, the beautiful objects, the controlled light, the aspirational emptiness of luxury performed for its own sake. And she pressed the elevator button and stood with her back straight and her hands not shaking and the burgundy blazer doing the job she'd bought it for. The elevator came. She got in. She exhaled. Jamin was waiting outside. Not on the sidewalk in front of the building. That would have been too visible, too much like a scene. He was across the street, standing beside a car, in a gray coat she hadn't seen before, and he crossed when he saw her come through the revolving door. He reached her on the sidewalk. He looked at her face and read it without asking. They said no, he said. They said no to the public acknowledgement. They're willing to discuss the rest. She started walking. He walked beside her. Voss was careful. Haas was frightened. The PR counsel was tracking something. I think someone who Claire contacted for authentication told Orleans what the follow-up piece contains. I know, Jae-min said. She stopped. She turned and looked at him. You know, she said. Daejung identified the contact this morning. A former employee, Claire, approached for corroboration of the email chain. He made 2 calls after she reached out. One to his current employer, one to a number registered to Orleans' crisis communications firm. And you didn't tell me this before I went in there. I found out at 10:53, he said. You were already on the elevator. She looked at him for a moment. What did they learn, she said. Crisis firm. What did the employee tell them about what Claire has? The email chain, the board awareness timeline, and the existence of a second story one that focuses not on the incident itself, but on the board's documented knowledge of prior complaints. The second story was not made up. She had told Claire, in the call at 2 in the morning, that if the board could be shown to have had direct knowledge board level, not just management level, the story became exponentially larger. Claire had said she'd been trying to establish that for 3 days. The email chain helped, but it only reached VP level. Board level required something more. She'd told Claire she might be able to get it. She hadn't told Jamin that she'd said that. She looked at him now on the 6th Avenue sidewalk, the city doing its enormous indifferent thing around them, cabs and noise, and the smell of a food cart 20 feet away. The board documentation, she said. Is it obtainable? He looked at her for a long moment. J. Min. There are board meeting minutes, he said carefully, from a governance review conducted 18 months ago. The review addressed operational risks across all flagship locations. Personnel complaint patterns were included in the risk assessment submitted to the full board. They knew, she said. The words came out flat. The board knew there was a complaint pattern. It was in a risk assessment, and they did nothing. The risk assessment recommended enhanced HR protocols, he said, which were implemented. On paper, the policy document. Policy document was the implementation. She stood very still on the sidewalk. They had known. Not just Garrett, not just Sandra Chen. The board of Orlean Brands International had received a document telling them that their flagship location had a personnel complaint pattern that constituted a risk, and they had commissioned a policy document to address it. And the policy document had been written specifically to legally insulate the behavior rather than change it. And they had approved it and moved on. Sasha Okonkwo's complaint had landed on a desk. Dolores Patricia Cross's complaint had landed on a desk. They had both been declined and filed and closed. And 18 months ago, in a boardroom somewhere in the city, someone had summarized those complaints as an operational risk, and the board had said write a policy. And someone had written a policy, and everyone had agreed that the risk was addressed. Can you get the minutes? She said. They're internal board documents, he said. They're not public. Can you get them? She said again. He looked at her. She looked at him. I told you I needed it to be legal, she said. I need to know if it is. Board minutes for privately held subsidiaries in New York are not subject to public disclosure requirements, he said. However, if a board member or officer shares them with a third party in circumstances that don't breach fiduciary duty, for instance, in the context of a merger inquiry, or due diligence, or a regulatory question. The building, she said. He was quiet. The Belmont meeting, she said. Due diligence on a property acquisition would include review of tenant risk profiles, which would include documented board discussions of operational risk. It could, he said. Is that what happened? Gerald Fitch was present at a meeting, Jamison said, during which due diligence materials were reviewed. Some of those materials were comprehensive. She looked at him. He looked back. Get Claire the minutes, she said. Tonight. If I do that, he said, this ends differently than you've planned. The board won't negotiate. They'll retrench. They'll fight. I know. Imani. He said her name the way she'd said his like the first time, like it meant something to say it. If they fight, this becomes a legal battle. Months. Your business gets associated with litigation. Your clients. My clients, she said, are women who hired me because I told them the truth about what rooms they were walking into and what those rooms would do if they let them. If I back down from this room because it got complicated, I don't deserve those clients. She held his gaze. Get Claire the minutes. Something shifted in his face. She'd seen it once before. The recalculation, the variable changing the result. He nodded. He turned away and lifted his phone to his ear. She walked to the corner and hailed a cab because she needed to move, needed the city to move around her, needed to be in transit rather than standing still on a sidewalk, feeling the full enormity of what she'd just committed to. Cab smelled like air freshener and someone's old lunch. She sat in the back and watched 6th Avenue recede. Her phone buzzed. Rochelle. I read the article. I need you to call me. Then, 3 seconds later, actually, I need you to call me right now. She called. Rochelle answered on the first ring. I'm proud of you, Rochelle said immediately, before Imani could speak. I'm proud of you and I'm scared for you and I need you to tell me you're okay. Imani said. And then she stopped, because she wasn't sure what the end of that sentence was, and she'd been lying to herself all morning about that, and she was too tired to do it now. You're not okay, Rochelle said. I found out my mother went to that store, Imani said. 4 years ago. Something happened to her. She filed a complaint. They sent her a letter that said her complaint was insufficient, and they closed the file. Rochelle was silent for a full 4 seconds. Dolores, she said. She never told me. She just pointed at a picture of the bag in a waiting room. She sat in a dentist's office, and she looked at the thing they told her she couldn't have, and she said, wouldn't that be something? Cab stopped at a light. The driver was listening to a sports radio station. The voices tinny and urgent. Imani, Rochelle said. Does your mother know what you've been doing this week? Not yet. You have to call her. I know. Not yet. She's going to. I know what she's going to do, Imani said. She's going to cry. And then she's going to tell me to be careful. And then she's going to pretend she's fine and hang up. And I can't have that living in me when I walk into the next thing I have to walk into. Rochelle understood. She always understood. What's the next thing? She said. I gave the board 48 hours to decide whether they're going to do what I've asked. And if they don't, then Claire publishes what she has and what she's about to have, and it gets considerably worse for them and for you. And for me, Imani agreed. Yes, okay, Rochelle said. Okay, I'm going to need you to eat something. Rochelle, I'm serious. Whatever you're about to do it having eaten. That's all I'm going to say. She did eat a sandwich from a place near her studio, taken in 4 bites, standing over the sink, because she didn't have time to sit. It was the best sandwich she'd had in a week, possibly because hunger made everything taste like survival. She worked for 3 hours. Client emails. 2 consultations she'd rescheduled and couldn't reschedule again. She was meticulous and present for both of them, because her clients deserved that, and because the discipline of it, the precision of showing up completely for someone else's need, was the only thing keeping her from vibrating apart at the frequency of everything that was unresolved. At 2:30 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number, she answered. Miss Cross, a woman's voice, older measured. Not Haas, not Constance, someone she hadn't met. My name is Eleanor Voss. I'm Richard Voss's wife. And before you say anything, I want you to know that I'm not calling on behalf of my husband or of the board. I'm calling because I read the article this morning, and I read the section about your mother, and I want you to know. The woman stopped, took a breath. I want you to know that I'm sorry. Imani stood very still in her studio. Mrs. Voss, she said carefully, how did you get this number? My husband has it in his files from this morning's meeting preparation. I want to be clear, he doesn't know I'm calling. I'm calling because I have been on the board of 2 charitable organizations focused on workplace equity, and I have been Mrs. Richard Voss for 31 years, and sometimes those 2 things are in considerable tension. Another breath. The board minutes from the governance review. My husband signed the approval of the risk response. He knew. I want you to know that I know he knew. The room was very quiet. Why are you telling me this? Imani said. Because someone should, Eleanor Voss said. And then, before Imani could respond, before she could process the particular vertigo of a board chairman's wife, calling her personal cell to confirm what she'd spent 6 days trying to prove, the call waiting lit up with Jamin's name, and she understood from the timing, from the fact that he was calling right now, in this specific minute, that something had broken. I need to put you on hold, she told Eleanor Voss. She switched. Tell me, she said. Jamin's voice was level. It was the level of a man controlling something. Aureline issued a statement, he said. 20 minutes ago, they announced the termination of a senior associate at the Midtown flagship for violation of company conduct standards. They expressed commitment to inclusion and customer dignity. They announced an internal review. She knew what that meant. They fired Mallory. She said yes. Before the 48 hours.
Yes.
To get in front of Claire's follow-up.
Yes.
A pause. He stopped. What? They also issued a cease and desist to the publication, he said, claiming the email chain was obtained through improper means and constitutes stolen proprietary material. They're threatening to sue Claire's publication if the follow-up runs. The air in the room seemed to change temperature. Can they do that? She said. Their legal team will try. Whether it succeeds depends on how the chain was obtained and what Claire's publication is willing to absorb. The publication backs down. The follow-up doesn't run. The board minutes don't matter. Mallory is the story. Mallory is fired. The story is over, and Aureline survives it as an isolated incident rather than a systemic failure. His voice was still controlled. And everything you've built this week becomes the scaffolding for an outcome you never intended. She was holding her phone with both hands now. She could feel her pulse in her jaw. Eleanor Voss was on the other line. Claire was somewhere right now, reading a cease and desist and talking to her editor and calculating what the publication was willing to fight. Rochelle was somewhere eating lunch, not knowing any of this. Her mother was somewhere in her apartment in the Bronx, Having seen the article, she must have seen it by now. Someone must have sent it to her sitting in her kitchen with a cup of tea and knowing and saying nothing, the way she had said nothing for 4 years. Amani took one breath. She took one more. She switched back to Eleanor Voss. Mrs. Voss, she said, are you willing to say what you just told me on record? Not to me, to a journalist. Your name, your position, your knowledge of the board's awareness. A long silence. If I do that, Eleanor Voss said quietly, my marriage may not survive it. I know, Amani said. I'm asking anyway. The silence stretched. The city moved outside her window. Her pulse was still in her jaw. Eleanor Voss said, tell me the journalist's name. Amani closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them, pulled up Claire's number, and began to dial while she was still on the line with Eleanor Voss. And she understood, in that specific moment, with the particular clarity that comes from having run out of safe options, that there was no version of the next 48 hours that did not cost something irreplaceable. For Eleanor Voss, for Claire's publication, for Jamin's carefully constructed distance from all of this, and for herself, and that she was choosing it anyway, was choosing it fully and without the comfort of certainty, because the alternative was her mother's letter, declined and filed and insufficient, sitting in a cabinet in a building on 57th Street, while the emerald bag sat in a magazine in a waiting room, and a woman said, wouldn't that be something to the empty air, and meant something. Eleanor Voss said yes. She said it quietly, the way people say the things that will cost them the most, not dramatically, not with the weight of a declaration, but with the flatness of someone who has been deciding for a long time and has finally stopped deciding. She said yes, and then she said she would need until tomorrow morning, and Amani said yes. Tomorrow morning was fine, and gave her Claire's direct number, and when she hung up, the studio was so quiet she could hear the refrigerator in the back room running. She sat with both phones on the table in front of her. She called Jamin back. Eleanor Voss is going on record, she said. She'll call Claire by 9 a.m. tomorrow. A silence that lasted 4 seconds. She called you directly, he said. Yes. Richard Voss's wife. Yes. Another silence, shorter. I didn't arrange that, he said. I know you didn't, Amani. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Not exactly concern. Closer to the thing that comes before concern, when someone is calculating risk and the calculation keeps coming back wrong. If Eleanor Voss goes on record, Richard Voss will understand within hours that the board minutes are no longer the most dangerous thing in this story. His wife is, and he will respond to that. I know. He has lawyers on retainer who specialize in... I know what kind of lawyers he has, she said. I know what he'll do. He'll go after Claire's publication harder. He'll try to discredit Eleanor. She stopped. It doesn't matter. She said yes. I'm not calling her back to talk her out of it. I'm not suggesting you do, he said. I'm telling you to be prepared for tomorrow to be worse than today. I've been prepared for that since Tuesday, she said. She hung up. She sat in the quiet for another minute. Then she picked up her phone and called her mother. Dolores Cross answered on the second ring. Baby, she said, and the word was so full of everything relief and worry, and something held back, and something given over, that Imani had to press her hand to her mouth for a moment before she could speak. Mama, she said, did you see the article? Rochelle sent it to me this morning. A pause. I've been waiting for you to call, I know. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Her mother's voice was soft and steady, the voice she used when she was being strong on purpose. Tell me you're all right. I'm all right. She meant it enough for it to count. Mama, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. When have I ever not been honest with you? 4 years ago, Imani said. October, Orlean House. The silence was long. Long enough that Imani could hear her mother breathing, and behind that, the faint sound of the television in the background, and then the sound of the television disappearing as her mother muted it. How did you find out? Dolores said. It came up in the course of the people who've been helping me. They pulled records. She paused. Mama, why didn't you tell me? Because her mother stopped. Started again. Because I handled it. You filed a complaint and they sent you a letter that said, insufficient evidence. I know what the letter said. That's not handling it. That's being shut out, Imani. Her mother's voice changed slightly. Firmer. The voice she used when she was disagreeing with something. I filed the complaint. I did what there was to do. And they said what they said, and I went home. That's handling it. Handling, it doesn't always mean winning. You should have told me. You were 25. You were building something. You didn't need to carry my... It was mine to carry, Imani said, and her voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly. Just enough. Mama. It was mine to carry too. You don't get to decide that alone. Another silence. When I saw that bag in the magazine, Dolores said, her voice quieter now. At the dentist's office. I wasn't mourning it. I want you to understand that. I wasn't sitting there feeling sorry for myself. I was looking at it and thinking, it's still beautiful. The same bag. Whatever they did, it's still beautiful, and I can still see it, and they can't take that. Imani pressed her fingers to her eyes. But you said, wouldn't that be something, she said. Yes, and I heard it. I know you did. And I saved for 7 months. A pause. I know, Dolores said. And I walked into the same store and the same thing happened. I know, baby. Her mother's voice broke, very quietly, just for a moment. I know. They were both quiet for a moment. The bag is on my shelf, Imani said. I haven't given it to you yet because I needed this to be finished first. I needed it to mean what I wanted it to mean when I handed it to you. You don't need to give me anything. I know I don't need to. I want to. Her mother made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something sadder. You are so much your father's daughter sometimes. He used to do that too. Make the gesture perfect before he let himself make it. Imani smiled. It felt strange on her face. It felt real. I'll come Sunday, she said. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'll come Sunday. I'll make jollof, her mother said. Make extra. I always make extra. Have you been eating? Rochelle asked me the same thing. Because we're the two people who know you don't eat when you're working through something. I had a sandwich. That's not Mama. I'm just saying. I know. I'll eat Sunday. She exhaled slowly. I love you. I love you, her mother said. Imani, be careful tomorrow. I will. She hung up and sat in her studio until the light changed, until the afternoon became early evening, and the street outside shifted into its end-of-day rhythm, and she let herself feel the full weight of the week without trying to file it, or organize it, or transform it into something useful. She just felt it. All of it. Her mother's voice. The letter with insufficient specificity of claim. Mallory's practiced regret. The box on the shelf at home. The burgundy blazer and the gold earrings and the elevator mirror and Voss's controlled face and Eleanor Voss's quiet yes. She felt all of it. Then she went home and ate a real dinner and went to sleep before 10. Claire's publication did not back down. Imani learned this at 7:15 a.m. when Claire called, voice tight with the specific exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept. We're running the follow-up, Claire said. My editor decided last night. The legal team reviewed the cease and desist and advised that we have a defensible position on the email chain under source protection law and that the public interest argument is strong enough to proceed. Eleanor Voss called you at 9:02 this morning. We talked for 40 minutes. Pause. She's extraordinary. She's paying a price I can't calculate, Imani said. She knows that. Claire stopped. She said that she has spent 31 years in rooms where she knew what was wrong and said nothing because the cost of saying something was too high, and that she has decided she's done calculating that cost. Imani sat with that. The piece runs at noon, Claire said. I wanted you to know before it posted. Thank you. Imani. A pause. What you've built this week. What you found. What you put together. I've been doing this for 9 years, and I've never had a source who came in with this level of documentation and this level of clarity about what they wanted. I want you to know that. Write it well, Imani said. I will. The second piece ran at noon as promised. It was longer than the first nearly 6,000 words. It reproduced the board meeting minutes, authenticated by Eleanor Voss's direct confirmation, and by 2 additional governance experts Claire had reached overnight. It quoted Eleanor Voss by name. It traced the complaint suppression pattern, not just to Philip Garrett and Sandra Chen, but directly to a board-level risk assessment that had known, formally documented, that the flagship location had a discriminatory pattern, and had responded by commissioning a policy document designed to provide legal cover rather than behavioral change. It named Richard Voss. It's named the 2 board members who had approved the risk response. By 2 p.m., Aureline's stock, parent company, was publicly traded, a detail Imani had not fully absorbed until now, had dropped 4%. By 3 p.m., Aureline's PR firm had issued a statement announcing that Richard Voss was stepping aside pending a board review. By 4:30 p.m., Amani's phone rang. With a number she recognized as David Haas, she answered. Miss Cross. His voice had changed. The practiced neutrality was still there, but something underneath it had given way. We'd like to schedule a meeting. At your convenience. Tomorrow, she said. 10 a.m. Same conference room. Yes, he said. Of course. She hung up. She sat for a moment. Then she called Jae-min. It's moving, she said. I'm watching it, he said. The stock drop will accelerate the board's timeline. By tomorrow morning, they'll be significantly more motivated. Eleanor Voss, Amani said. What happens to her? A beat. Difficult to say, he said. Her husband will likely retain separate counsel. The marriage, he paused. She knew what she was doing. Yes, she did. That doesn't make it easier. No, so he said. It doesn't. She looked out her window at the October sky, gone gray with the particular gray of New York. In the second half of the month, the light changing towards something thinner and more honest. Jamin, she said. Yes, thank you. She said it the way she said most things she meant directly, without preamble, without softening it into something more manageable. I know you could have done this without me. I know the cleaner version of whatever you had planned didn't involve a woman who says no to you in the middle of a boutique and then calls you at midnight to tell you what she's going to do. He was quiet for a moment. The cleaner version, he said, would have been a lever. Just a lever. Pressure applied, cost made real, behavior modified. A pause. What you did was different. What did I do? You made them answer for it, he said. Not just pay for it. Answer for it. She thought about that. There's a difference, she said. Yes, he said. There is. The meeting the next morning lasted 3 hours. Haas was there. Constance Jarvis was not Shahad. Amani would learn later, resigned the previous evening. In her place was a woman named Dr. Amara Osi, who had been brought in overnight from Orleans' parent company as interim EVP of operations, and who had read everything, the articles, the complaint files, the board minutes, Amani's original document before walking into the room. Amara Ose sat across from Imani and looked at her with the direct, unsentimental gaze of someone who had been given a burning building and a deadline. Tell me what you need, Amara said. Not what Amani wanted, what she needed. The distinction was not accidental. Amani opened her notebook. She went through each demand. The anti-discrimination policy-specific language, measurable standards, third-party auditable, the independent complaint mechanism, the consequences structure, professional pathways, the public acknowledgement. On the public acknowledgement, Haas began to speak. Amara held up one hand. We'll issue it, Amara said. Specific, factual, named. She looked at Haas. The legal risk of not doing it is now larger than the legal risk of doing it. We'll draft language and send it to Ms. Cross for review before it goes out. Haas was quiet. The complaint filed 4 years ago, Amani said. Dolores Patricia Cross. I want it formally reopened and addressed, with a direct communication to the complainant, not a form letter, something that acknowledges specifically what happened and what the company's response should have been. Amara wrote it down. The Pathways Program, Amani said. I'm not interested in an internship pipeline. I'm interested in funded fellowship positions at the senior associate level at the minimum 2-year commitment with a review board that I have a seat on for the first 3 years. That's, Haas started. That's what it costs, Amani said. Amara kept writing. And I want to be clear about one more thing, Amani said. She looked at Amara rather than Haas, because Amara was the one who would carry this forward. The employee Mallory Vance. You fired her publicly to manage the story. I understand why you did it. But she was a person who was hired, trained, and rewarded in a culture that incentivized exactly what she did. I'm not asking you to rehire her. I'm not asking you to protect her from consequences. I'm saying that the way she was fired as a sacrificial announcement was wrong. If your acknowledgement is going to mean anything, it has to say that she was not the source of the problem. The source of the problem was what this company built around her. Amara looked at her for a long moment. I can include that, she said, in the acknowledgement. Good, Amani said. When the meeting ended, Amani walked out of the building and stood on the same stretch of 6th Avenue where she'd stood the day before. And the city did what it always did, which was not pause, not acknowledge, not offer any particular ceremony for what had just concluded. She was glad for that. She was exhausted in a way that went down to the bone, the kind of tired that doesn't respond to sleep, but only to time, to the slow process of integrating something large into the body of a life that has to keep going. Her phone buzzed. Rochelle, well? She typed back, come over Saturday. Bring wine. Rochelle, that's a yes? She thought about it. It's a something, she typed. Come over. Saturday afternoon. Rochelle came with wine and also with food, which Amani had expected, because Rochelle expressed love in meals and had been expressing it this way since they were 14, and Rochelle would show up to Amani's apartment after hard days with whatever her mother had made, and a look that said, we're not going to talk about it until you've eaten. They ate at Amani's kitchen table, and Rochelle read the acknowledgement Oraline had sent for Amani's review, and she read it twice, and then she set it down. They named your mother, Rochelle said. Dolores Patricia Cross, Amani said. I asked them to use her full name. How did she react? I read it to her on the phone last night. Amani looked at her glass. She didn't say anything for a long time. And then she said she stopped, pressed her lips together for a moment. She said, they spelled it right. That was all. They spelled it right. Rochelle was quiet. She's been carrying that for 4 years, Amani said. And what mattered to her, when it finally got addressed, was that they spelled her name correctly, that they had to learn it, that it had to be a real name in a real document, not just a complaint, not just an insufficient claim. She looked up. Do you know what that means? That's what mattered to her. It means a name is not a small thing, Rochelle said. No, Amani said, it's not. They sat with that. The city moved outside the window, doing what it did, indifferent and vast and entirely itself. Sunday came gray and cold, with the first real edge of winter in the air. Amani took the train to the Bronx with the emerald box under her arm, wrapped now in brown paper, because she'd wanted it to feel like a gift rather than an artifact, and she rode up through Manhattan watching the neighborhoods change outside the window, thinking about nothing in particular, and everything at once. Her mother's building was the same building. It had always been 4 floors, brick, the super's number on a laminated card by the door, the elevator that worked most of the time. She went up to the 3rd floor and knocked, which she didn't always do, and her mother opened the door in her good housecoat, and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she looked at Amani for a moment, just looked at her, the way she looked at her, sometimes when Amani had come through something, and then she stepped back to let her in. The apartment smelled like jollof rice, and the specific warmth of a home that has been lived in completely, where every surface has a history. They ate first. Amani had known her mother would not allow the gift before the meal, because gifts were for after, for when the table was cleared and the tea was made and there was time to sit with things properly. She ate 2 full plates. Her mother watched her eat with the contained satisfaction of someone who has been worried about a person's appetite. They talked about ordinary things, Rochelle's new job, the neighbor's dog, a show Dolores had been watching, the weather. They talked around the week the way you talk around something enormous that you're both aware of and have agreed, wordlessly, to approach in your own time. When the tea was made and the table was cleared, Amani put the brown paper package on the table. Her mother looked at it. She looked at Amani. Mama, Amani said, you pointed at a picture in a waiting room 4 years ago, and you said, wouldn't that be something? I heard you. I've been hearing you since. Her mother's hands came up to the package but didn't open it, just rested on the paper. I know what's in here, Dolores said. I know you know, Amani. Her mother's voice was very careful, very steady. You didn't have to do all of this for a bag. I know, Amani said. I didn't do it for the bag. Her mother looked at her. I did it because you went there alone, and they told you no, and they sent you a letter, and you came home and said nothing, and I need you to know. Her voice held. She made it hold. I need you to know that is never how it ends anymore. Not with me here. Not with me standing in the same rooms. She paused. I'm not in front of you. I'm not fixing it for you. But I am going to be where you are, and I am going to say the things that need to be said, and they are going to spell your name correctly. Her mother opened the package, the box, then the tissue, then the emerald bag, green as something alive, structured and still and exactly what it had always been. Dolores Cross held it in her hands for a long time. She turned it over. She ran her thumb across the clasp. She looked at the color, the specific deep green of it, the way it caught the afternoon light coming through the kitchen window, And her face did something that Imani had very rarely seen it do, which was let itself be fully visible. It's the same one, Dolores said, the exact one. From the picture. Yes. Her mother held it for a long time. She didn't put it on. She didn't perform appreciation. She just held it. The way you hold something you thought had a particular meaning and have discovered has a different and larger one. Your father would have loved this story, she said finally. The whole thing? The whole messy thing. Her mother almost smiled. He liked when things were complicated. He used to say the easy wins don't teach you anything. He was right. He was right about a lot of things. She set the bag down carefully on the table, where the evening light could find it. Tell me about the man. Imani looked at her. What man? She said. Her mother gave her a look that had decades of knowing her daughter in it. The man who was at the store, who the article called a witness, who chose to act. He's complicated, I gathered. He's not. It's not like that. I didn't say it was like anything, her mother said mildly, picking up her tea. His name is Jae-min, Imani said. He has business interests. She said it the way he said it, and something about repeating his evasion made her almost smile. He's not an easy person. He doesn't know how to stand beside someone. He knows how to stand in front of someone and call it protection. Did he learn? He's learning, Imani said. Her mother nodded, sipped her tea. Bring him, she said. Mama, I made enough jollof for 3. I always make enough for 3. Her mother set her cup down. I want to thank him for standing beside you. She looked at Imani, even if he had to learn what that meant. He came on a Wednesday evening 2 weeks later, when Imani's businesses had absorbed the temporary turbulence of public association with a scandal and come out the other side with 7 new client inquiries. 3 of them from women who had read Claire's articles and said some version of, I want to work with the woman who did that. He came after the public acknowledgement had been issued Oraline's formal statement, specific and factual, and naming Dolores Patricia Cross. And after the independent board review had removed 2 directors and appointed 3 new ones, one of whom Amara Osei had suggested and Imani had quietly approved. He came after Mallory Vance had spent 2 weeks in a kind of public purgatory before the news cycle moved on, as news cycles do, and left her to do whatever the next part of her life was going to be in privacy, without Imani either defending or pursuing her. He came alone. He knocked on Dolores Cross's door at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday in November, in a coat that was less formal than his usual suit, still good, still precise, but something he had perhaps chosen deliberately, as though he understood that this particular evening required a different register. Imani answered the door. He looked at her. She looked at him. She knows who you are, Imani said. She knows enough. He said. He stepped in. The apartment was the apartment, warm and specific and full of the history of a life lived in it. Dolores was in the kitchen, from which emerged the smell of food and the sound of something on the stove, and she came out wiping her hands on a cloth, her reading glasses on, her good housecoat replaced by a proper blouse, because company had been expected. She looked at Jamin. He looked at her. He had never, in Imani's observation, looked anything other than controlled in the presence of other people, even in the boutique, even confronting Mallory, even in the meetings and the car and the restaurant. He had been measured, contained, the temperature of a room he was managing. He looked at Dolores Cross, and something shifted in his face that Imani had not seen before. It was the look of a man who has carried something for 26 years and has just been set down in front of the shape of it. Mrs. Cross, he said. Jae-min, her mother said, as though she'd been saying his name for years. Come sit down. The food is almost ready. He sat. He ate. He was not, as Imani had expected, entirely silent. Her mother had a particular gift for drawing speech out of people who had decided not to offer it, and she used it on him without appearing to try, asking small questions about small things, the food and the city, and where he had grown up, and he answered them, briefly at first, and then with slightly more, the way water finds its level. At one point, over the rice, her mother said, My daughter told me you have business interests. Jamin glanced at Imani. She mentioned that, he said. Her mother served herself more rice. My husband was an accountant, very specific, very careful. He used to say that the most honest thing a person could say about their work was what problem they were solving, not what they did, what problem they were solving. She looked at Jae-min. What problem do you solve? He was quiet for a moment. I make sure that the people with leverage use it, he said, and that the people without it, he stopped. Chose the next word carefully. Have access to it. Her mother considered this. That's honest, she said. After dinner, Dolores excused herself to the kitchen and came back carrying the emerald bag. Not in the box, just the bag itself over her arm, the way it had been in the magazine Photograph Simpson's present, and exactly itself. She stood in the living room in her good blouse, with the emerald bag over her arm, and she looked between Amani and Jae-min with the calm of a woman who has been through enough to know what matters. Thank you, she said to Jae-min for standing beside her. Jae-min looked at Amani. Amani said gently, he didn't stand in front of me. He learned to stand beside me. The correction was the same one she would give. Years later, when people asked her how it had happened, how a woman who walked into a boutique on an ordinary Tuesday had changed the conditions under which the next woman who walked through those doors would be received, she would always give the same answer, which was not about strategy or documentation or leverage or press, but about the specific difference between being protected and being accompanied, between someone who stands in front of you and takes the impact on your behalf, which is a kind of gift but also a kind of erasure, and someone who stands beside you and lets you take the impact yourself, and is simply there, present and unhiding when it lands. Jae-min received the correction the way he received all corrections from her, without deflecting it, without defending himself from it, just holding it and letting it be true. He almost smiled. The evening ended slowly, the way evenings with good food and no agenda end gradually, in layers, with coats and thanks, and the particular warmth of a room where something has been settled that needed settling. At the door, Dolores embraced her daughter for a long moment, the emerald bag still on her arm, its green catching the hallway light. Then she turned to Jae-min and held out her hand. Not for a handshake, but the way older women sometimes offer a hand when they mean something more specific than a greeting. He took it. Come back, Dolores said. He looked, for the first time in Amani's knowledge of him, like someone who did not know exactly what to do with what was being offered to him, which was simply welcome, simply the unconditional and unearned hospitality of being told that a door would be open. Thank you, he said. They walked down the hallway toward the elevator, and Amani pressed the button, and they waited in the specific quiet of a building at night, the sounds of other lives coming through the walls, a television, a child's voice, something cooking, someone laughing at something they would never know about. She kept the bag with her, Jae-min said, all evening. She didn't put it down. She's waited 4 years to hold it the right way, Amani said. The elevator came. They got in. In the mirrored door, she could see both of them, her gold earrings, his coat, both of them standing in the small lit space of the elevator, with their reflections multiplied behind them, going back into a distance that the mirror invented, but that felt, just then, like something true about the way everything accumulated every boutique and waiting room, and declined complaint and letter, with insufficient specificity of claim and magazine, in a dentist's office, and 7 months of savings and 1 matte black card, and 1 phone call and 1 yes from a woman who had finally stopped calculating the cost. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked at her size, and her skin, and her earrings, and her edges, and the burgundy blazer she'd put on again, for no reason, except that it was hers and it fit, and she liked it. She had not made herself smaller. She had not become quieter. She had not found some version of herself that was easier for the rooms to approve. The rooms had changed. Not all of them. Not permanently, not without pressure and surveillance, and the ongoing work of people who would have to keep doing it long after this particular week was finished. She understood that. She was not the kind of person who mistook a battle for a war, or a war's turning for its end, but these rooms this week, this specific thing. The elevator opened on the ground floor. They walked out into the November night, and the Bronx was what it always was, alive and complicated and entirely itself, and the cold hit them cleanly, the kind of cold that clarifies rather than numbs. Jae-min's car was at the curb. His driver was there. He stopped at the door and turned. Your next client, he said. The one who emailed this week. The woman from the Times piece. The one who said she'd been following the story. She's not just a client. She runs the equity initiative for a major luxury group in Europe. He looked at her steadily. I looked her up. Of course you did. She reached out to you because she wants to use your framework, the complaint structure, the audit model, internationally. Amani looked at him. You looked up my client, she said. I looked up someone who contacted you. Same thing. Is it? She looked at him for a long moment in the November dark. This man she had said no to in a boutique, who had given her a card, who had moved pieces she hadn't known were in play, who had learned, she believed he had learned, imperfectly and genuinely, what standing beside someone actually required. Don't look up my client, she said. All right, he said. I mean it. I know. She looked at him a moment longer. She emailed me back today, Amani said. We're meeting next week. Something moved across his face, not the recalculation. Simpler than that. The expression of someone watching something they helped set in motion becomes something larger than they planned, and finding that they are glad. Good, he said. She turned up her collar against the cold. She turned and walked toward the subway, the same way she walked into every room, every train, every morning, which was with her full height and her full weight, and the complete, unapologetic fact of herself, and she did not look back, because she didn't need to, and because the street was cold and bright ahead of her, and there were things she was going to do in it, and the night was just the night, holding all of it, the emerald still catching light on her mother's arm, 3 floors above, the city going its own way around her, the weeks ahead already taking shape in the part of her mind that was always working. She walked. The city held her and didn't hold her, the way cities do indifferent and enormous, and somehow always exactly large enough.